Good afternoon, Natalie.
Hey there, Jake.
How's it going?
It's good. Happy day. We have some sh sunshine out finally for a moment.
Yeah, I know. Lots of rain over the last week. More coming for those of us in the Bay Area. But
We're coming.
um,
But
well,
a
we're
good day to
into
discuss
do what?
phenomenology. A good
Let's
day
go
to
into
discuss
phenomenology. Let's do it.
phenomenology.
Let's talk about ontotheology and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're into the the sort of second module dealing with phenomenology. After looking at Heidegger and Heidegger's phenomenological critique of the metaphysics of presence and ontotheology and all that kind of stuff, which, it's a lot to do in a single module. We're moving at a pretty extraordinary clip forward, and here we are looking at some really essentially post Heideggerian thinkers, people who are in that phenomenological tradition, learned from Heidegger, learned from Husserl, but are trying to do something different, and something really different in actually some ways. Um, yeah, and I think we can see in one sense with Jean-Luc Marion, who's still alive. I've
Oh,
I
yes.
don't know if I've met him. I've been in rooms with him, but I don't know that we've ever actually spoken. Pretty sure. I think I might have shook his hand once at an American Academy of Religion, which was it's like it's just sort of fanboy. Like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh,
yeah.
it's Jean-Luc.
Hi.
He always wears like a bow tie everywhere. So that's what I remember about it. Anyway, and Emmanuel Levinas, who's been an enormous influence on French philosophy and on thinkers, Anglophone thinkers who are drawing from the continental tradition, and even on a lot of fields outside of philosophy too. So both of these figures, I think, are doing some parallel moves, but doing something different, interesting in it. And both of them are trying to avoid what they see as the pitfalls in Heidegger's thought, the pitfalls of still being captured uh, by a certain kind of reduction, a certain kind of closure of being,
Yeah.
and an inability to think. Levinas, I mean, it's complicated. Levinas thinks that Heidegger is can't think the infinite other, the infinite of otherness, the infinity of otherness. It's complicated because for Heidegger, Dasein is kind of infinite, but both Marion and Levinas want to find a way for something that's not reducible to, say, the human or to Dasein
Mhm.
to break in to our world, and for us to be able to say something about it, even if we can't say what it is. We need to be able to speak about the possibility of this, let's say.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that's kind of where there is a developing thread here. There's a movement of thought that makes sense. There's a narrative that you can tell about where we've gone from the birth of modernity with Descartes, Hume, and then Kant through this Heideggerian moment, and you've got Nietzsche and others in the background there, into this phenomenological moment that we're looking at in this module,
Yeah.
that's wrestling with the fate of the questions that have traditionally been held by metaphysics, but also the possibility of renewing thinking on the other side of what some people are, what Heidegger called the end of metaphysics, right?
Right.
And Derrida talks about the end of the metaphysics of presence and doing away with metaphysics. All these efforts. There's an effort on these two thinkers to say, is it just an end, or is that end a new beginning for something different,
Yeah.
uh, something maybe even more? Uh, what's the word I want to look say more? Um, More fulsome, more emancipatory, more uh, I, I want to say authentic, but that word's got so many Heideggerian things that in it. But
You ruined
but
that one.
but like authentic in a colloquial sense. So
Well, or even the ability to speak about if we're talking about the divine at all, being able to speak about it at all, um, because of the way that if we're going to dissolve on, if how we can talk about God, and now even God is too convoluted of a term now that
Hmm.
we're here. Which God are we talking about? The God of
Yeah.
metaphysics or the God of divine? Um, but I will say that I do actually, as I'm reading through each of these, because we're doing very short, quick snippets on each of these chapters.
Right.
And I think to myself, okay, what is the story that we're being told here? What is the narrative that Jake is outlining for us here? And now you didn't author the story, but you are the author of the recap, let's say, at the beginning
Yeah.
of
I
the
mean, I curated these
curated
texts.
the recap,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, like on this episode, Kant totally dismantles what we can know about the and the God of reason is now crumbled before us, and maybe we can only have a God of faith. And Heidegger insists that it blinds us to being. And I have to admit that as suspicious of Heidegger as I got attached in last week's episode. I was like, yeah, I'm here for the question of being, capital B being.
Hmm.
We need to discuss that. That is the ground of all grounds. And now Marion's gonna come along and mess it up and be like, no, no ground, no ground whatsoever. How do you think of God now without any ground? And that's kind of now I'm at the edge of my seat on what
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 comes next?
what comes next? How do we
Yeah.
make this? And how do we quick learn some phenomenological terminology in order to make sense of what both Levinas and Marion are doing here in very different ways, but
Yeah.
responding.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. And I have never thought of it in terms of episodes with cliffhangers. Um, for the sake of
I
our
have too many children.
students, though, I will say that unlike the writers of Lost, I have actually thought this through to the end at this point. That doesn't mean I wrap it up nicely because it's still ongoing, but I
No,
at
I
least
trust you. They're
know.
not going to abandon us on like season 6.
um, yeah. Well, what terminology do you think would be helpful to talk about?
Well, um, let's see. Let's start with Marion instead of the other way around. I was tempted to start with
Hmm.
Levinas. I feel like both could warrant the full hour, so I want to
Hmm.
be mindful of that and being able to touch on both of them. But as I was rereading through the Marion and his fabulous recap, I feel like each of these philosophers are doing this
Yeah.
historical recap, and that used to exasperate me because I used to feel like, oh God, there's this whole history
Get
that
to your
I
point.
need to, yeah, and get to your point, but it does sort of replay each time
Yeah.
to what the point they want to make, right? So Marion is
Yeah.
like Heidegger was doing that with Hegel as his
Hmm.
foil. Marion is doing that here with Nietzsche and Heidegger. And when he launches into, okay, this is how phenomenology is going to address this problem of the ontotheos undoing itself. What do we have left there? And he uses the term donation. Um, and donation and givenness, being given rather than moving from being to being given. And I can hear now I wonder if this is a translation issue too, because I can hear the similarities in donation and given. Those two words feel linked to me, but maybe you could trace us through how Marion is making that pathway uh, from onto the onto theology, the God of metaphysics that is being challenged and
Right.
best to, okay, well then how do we speak about it at all? And what is this word donation that we need to understand?
Hmm. Okay, that's great. The the connection between donation and being given is is there in both the French and the German and the English. The French is just donation, and it means almost the same thing as it does in English. So um, the Marion will oftentimes play on this, play on these terms. The French for gave is adonner, and he'll talk about Marion will talk about the adonner, the talk about the gift, the given. He'll play on these notions a lot. In doing so, he's drawing attention, of course, back to Husserl's concept of phenomenology, right? So in that bit where he talks about the principle of principles and phenomenology is that you pay attention to that what phenomenology attends to is only what is given in phenomena, and so the givenness, being given in phenomena, that givenness aspect is part of what Marion is going to center his philosophical inquiry into, his phenomenological inquiry into. Um, just as an aside, with Marion is an enormously difficult thinker because he is so profoundly learned in multiple areas, right? He is one of the greatest historians of philosophy in France. I mean, just as a historian of philosophy, that's all he did. He would have been elected to the Académie Française. And so the kind of work that he's done, especially on Descartes, he's got multiple volumes doing these extraordinary readings of Descartes, but also of Augustine, of various figures. And so, just as a historian, I almost want to say historian of ideas, but as a historian of philosophy, he's excellent. So he just knows an enormous amount that way. But then he's a an incredible phenomenologist, just working on sort of the cutting edge of what phenomenology is doing. And Marion's work in that comes to a culmination in, well, it had come to a culmination in a text that's called Being Given. And in that text Being Given, he's examining the idea of or he's looking at a reduction to givenness beyond Husserl's reduction to essences and Heidegger's reduction to being. Marion's trying to go back behind. So the phenomenological reduction is you bracket out, you bracket out everything that's not appearing in order to let what is appear from itself as it is, etc. Heidegger language, whatever. Uh, but the extent of that bracketing can reveal different structural aspects of our experience. And what, kind of like the game in phenomenology, if you will, and I don't mean that in a non-serious sense, like it's a serious game, but the way it's done is, and often the motivation is to try to get at the sort of deepest structural aspect that can let phenomena dictate the structures of their appearing to us, right? So Heidegger's trying to get at being beyond Husserl's reduction, to sort of like letting the essences of things go. Heidegger's trying to get to that it is. Marion is trying to get not to being. He's saying even behind being, more profound than being, is the event of givenness itself. It's the givenness to intuition, as Husserl put it, and that givenness is part of what Heidegger or what Marion is trying to get to, and that's why he uses that language of like donation. How is that relational presentation uh, given? And the thing about the givenness is, it by focusing on a phenomenology of givenness, it allows Marion to do something that Levinas does in a different way, which is to look at the um, way that givenness exceeds and creates the possibility of my being a self at all. So it creates the possibility of, and so in that sense, it outmaneuvers the whole project we've been looking at since Kant, right?
Yeah.
If what Kant did is said we can't have a metaphysics of the world because we can't know things in themselves, because we only know things as they're structured by the categories of the understanding and the forms of the intuition.
Mhm.
What Marion is trying to show is how there is a givenness that precedes my categorical and intuitive structuring that in fact makes me to be the kind of being I am. And that's what he's saying. And crucially, what he's saying is that that givenness appears phenomenologically. That's given in phenomena. That's not something that I'm adding to the world. That's part of the structural. That's part of the structure of phenomenal experience itself. That there is this primal givenness, and that reverses the order of intentionality. So part of what Husserl had Husserl had pointed out that the structure of experience always involves intentionality. So there's a kind of subject intending an object. This is how Husserl tried to get back to things themselves, because he's saying the fundamental direction of our knowing, of cognition, has this intentional vector that's moving out. And in phenomenological description, the my intentionality is always against the background of a kind of horizon.
Mhm.
Marion is saying that intentional vector can be reversed so that I'm essentially what's intended. I can feel myself intended by a phenomena, not just feel myself. That becomes the way in which I, as a self, come into being.
Mhm.
So, so I'm, as it were, downstream of phenomenal appearance. And then, of course, after that, I can intend things against the background of a horizon. I can structure things according to my categories and things like that. But
Yeah.
that givenness, the phenomena of give, the phenomenon of givenness is more basic than even my categories. And if that's the case, then Marion's uncovered within the structure of experience, the structure of phenomenal existence. He's discovered a way to seek about things that are not reducible to my thinking them, and and it's even more basic than that's what Heidegger's also after with with his description of of being and Dasein's openness, but where Marion goes beyond Heidegger is Heidegger's just got the infinite openness of Dasein there, and it's
Yeah.
always this kind of like concealed, unconcealing as this mixture of of sort of like becoming and being eaten up again by things. Marion's got a Marion has a I think a deeper account of how, of the possibility of my being the kind of being I am, the possibility of he doesn't use the language of Dasein, but the possibility of the Adone, the the self in the another way to put it is grammatically. This is Levinas will use similar language that before the self is a subject, it is uh, spoken in the accusative voice, right? It's addressed. It's I'm the one who is addressed before I'm capable of addressing. Or
Mhm.
Levinas will say, like, before I'm a subject, I'm subjected to that which uh, is other, to the other,
Yeah.
and it's only in relationship to that other that I become right. And in fact, for Levinas, I know I'm switching between Marion and Levinas, but they're similar on this point.
Yeah.
And so I'm just choosing whichever one makes it a little bit more clearly. For Levinas, the infinite responsibility that I have in the face of the other, that's actually what particularizes me,
Yeah.
right? Because like, why would why would I? One thing you can pose to Heidegger is like, okay, sure, your Dasein is always in relationship and involved in structures of care with everything, and it's ineluctably historical and whatever. But why am I me
Yeah.
and not just Dasein? Say the same thing to Kant. Like, what is it about what makes me to be me? Right? It's if you're Aristotle, you think it's my matter that sort of particularizes my form. Um, Levinas is saying it's that reverse intentionality that makes me to be me, because it's it's non it's it's non-transferable, right? My ethical relationship before the face of another uh, is not something I can ask someone else to shoulder for me. I
Mhm.
can't say, "Oh, you carry my ethical duty, you carry my ethical responsibility. I'm gonna, you know, whatever, play Candy Crush." But Levinas is actually saying that ethical, that reverse intentionality where I'm intended, it's like a laser beam particularizing me,
Yeah.
calling me into the being that I will become as a subject. Marion says something similar, but he doesn't have it in quite the same ethical valence that Levinas does.
Right. But he is making I actually have come to understand the move that Levinas is making more thoroughly with through Marion because
Marion, yeah,
he he takes the steps of like the way that you just narrated the steps of how we come into the self through the other. At one point, he was like, "You the what you just narrated makes this quote make more sense." At one point, he said something along the lines of it reveals the a priori to actually be a posteriori. And I was like, what?
right.
How?
That's
You
that's
know,
that's what I was talking about.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So it's like the recovering of the things in themselves, but not through the way, not through the avenue not through an avenue that I would have considered, not through the scientific avenue of like, yeah,
mm-hmm.
there's tangible outside things. The phenomenological move that I'm hearing you describe is an encounter. Is that a good word? Like an encounter with things in themselves, whether that be the other of Levinas's face or maybe no, non-human others as well.
Right. Yeah, so for Marion in Marion's later works, he doesn't he it comes in this essay, but only slightly. Towards the end of the essay, he talks about saturated phenomena,
Mhm.
and what Marion means by a saturated phenomena is a phenomena uh, that is not reducible, not even capturable by what I'm able to intend. Uh, so you can think of three classes of phenomena. Uh, you can think of phenomena where what I intend and what they are absolutely identical, and this is really only in human experience. This is really only for sort of purely abstract entities. Like it's possible that I can think the number three in such a way that my thought of threeness absolutely coincides with three, right? It's a rational entity, so I can completely think it. Maybe there are mysteries, deep Pythagorean mysteries that exceed my capacity to think threeness. I'm probably inclined to think there are, but like just stick with
For
that for for a second.
the sake of having an example.
Yeah. Um, then there are uh, ordinary phenomena where they exceed my capacity to think them because I only ever sort of see them aspectually, right? So like, and and the early phenomenology talks about this a lot, right? So like when I see, right now I'm looking out beyond this screen, and I can see, our wood burning stove that we sometimes use to heat the house when there's not a ban on burning. Um, and but I can only see parts of it, and I know that it opens up, and inside there's a stove, and there's ashes, and I there's another side of it, and right, I know all those things, but I can't see all those things at the moment, right? So like there are aspects of it that I can't fully see, and if you're Husserl, you say that like as I come to sort of know a phenomena, part of what I do is I take it and I sort of turn it around in my mind, and I see it from all these different aspects, and it's sort of like a cubist, working with a painting or something. So I'm like filling out my understanding of the objecthood of the object by supplementing all the things that can't appear to me just in that phenomenological in that visible givenness because I'm particular and dwell in a particular place, right?
Okay.
But that's ordinary. That's so there's a kind of infinity to ordinary objects. But that then there is a saturated phenomenon, and a saturated phenomena is so it's so full of meaning that I can't I can't intend it at all. Not because I have to bring more meaning to the phenomena, right? So when I'm looking at the stove, I have to bring more meaning to it by supplementing. I know there's a backside of the stove that can't be seen. I'm adding to it with my understanding in order to be more adequate to the object. In a saturated phenomena, I'm hit by such a wall of meaning sort of rushing at me that it's no longer the case that I'm adding anything to it. It's that there's too much meaning coming over me. There's too much fullness, and I can't make sense of it. And you might think of this in terms of something like, you might immediately leap because of the kind of class we're in to like, oh, well, that's God. Sure, fine. Marion thinks that too. That would be an experience of God would have to be like that. But
Mhm.
it's also things like the an event, as he'll put it. We don't understand events. We don't understand things that are happening that we don't have precedents for that are overwhelming, right? So like you're present in the face of like a war or something like that. You don't
Yeah.
know how to make sense of it. Um, Beauty can be this way. Artwork can be this way. I find myself, Rilke has that lovely poem, The Archaic Torso of Apollo, that I sometimes quote. The end of which is, he describes this, beautiful remnant from classical antiquity. Uh, and he describes it beautifully in the poem and then ends with the line, "You must change your life." There's this sense that standing before this thing, he feels himself addressed and inadequate to whatever it is. He can't understand it. It's overwhelming you. Or if you've seen Picasso's Guernica or something like that, right? There's just a sense of like, what is happening to me right now? Or we feel that in music and all these sorts of things. That overwhelming of something's happening to me. I can't hold it. I don't know what all this is, but there is clearly something that is doing something to me that is, I'm encountering it. That's a saturated phenomenon. And Marion will say that's the phenomenological condition of possibility for what we might want to call revelation or the appearance of God to us. Not that we can say revelation happens or God appears to people or whatever, but Marion's saying if there is this, if saturated phenomena happen, and
Mhm.
he's saying they do quite ordinarily, actually, uh, that capacity of something to make me, to overwhelm me with its intentions towards me, to overwhelm me with the meanings that I can't assimilate or in any sense be equal to. That is the, as it were, the phenomenological space. It's not even a space. I mean, that makes it too constrained because the whole point of the saturated phenomena is it's not constrained. Here is a way of describing an event, a givenness or a giving that wouldn't involve me capturing the phenomenon with my mind. And that's the problem that so many of these thinkers are trying to get around is like, how could we ever think God, if you will?
Yeah.
Because as soon as I thought God, I'd have reduced God to my thinking. Uh, and Marion's saying, well, okay, that may be the case, but that doesn't mean that you can't have an event of God's givenness or God's disclosure or of revelation. You don't have to use the word God if that's a triggering word. Think about, uh, you know, uh, um, Dharma or the
Mhm.
cosmos or something like that, right? Like whatever it is that vast that exceeds the human capacity to equal it with our concepts. Marion's saying just because our concepts can't grasp it doesn't mean it can't enter our
Right.
thinking.
Yeah. So is that what he means by being, he's abandoned? Is that the word? He says being
Yeah,
abandoned.
yeah, yeah,
Is that
yeah.
like
Because it's
not
an
not being left
abandonment of
behind,
being.
but an
Yeah,
abandonment inside of this overwhelming saturation?
yeah. It's as soon as he thinks that as soon as we think being, we're still we're still we still have a sort of categorical
Yeah,
grasp on something.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, and following Plato, and even he says later, Thomas Aquinas, he vacillates on this. Plato thinks about the good beyond being, epikeina tesousios. That's the heart of Plato in the Republic, Book 6. Uh, what Plato's aiming at, what the parable of the cave is illustrating in the release and the vision of the sun, is the vision of the good beyond being. So it's no longer captured by being. It's a pure donation. It's a pure gift
Mm,
uh, that isn't tied to any of the things that. And then this is kind of what Marion's arguing in that essay. That's not tied to any of the ways in which we make God intelligible for us under the strictures of ontotheology. So he takes Heidegger's critique of ontotheology very seriously, and he's saying what I'm trying to describe is how it's possible that there is a disclosure of the divine that then doesn't tie it back to it's the ground of something. This isn't the ground of existence as if it's answering the questions I put to it. It puts questions to me rather than me putting questions to it. Uh, it it uh, it captures me in a sense rather than me capturing it by my concepts.
mhm.
Um, yeah, Marion thinks a lot in work that he did before this about he distinguishes between he uses the language of icons and idols to distinguish between this. An icon looks at you and you're held by its gaze, whereas an idol is what you intend and capture. I said Marion wears these different hats. He's one of, if not the greatest, sort of living phenomenologist in France. He's this great historian of philosophy, and then he writes these books that have a kind of theological valence to them. The most famous of which is called Dieu sans lettres, God without being. So it's his, and it's really an extended response to the kind of critiques that Heidegger put up and that we've been kind of wrestling with. Quick aside, last little thing, little vignette. Uh, the When my wife Karen and I got engaged some 20 some years ago, uh, we were staying in the Cathar village of Carcassonne a few nights beforehand. Actually, the night that I proposed to her, and I was reading God Without Being on the walls there, and the city the village closes off at night. So if you're staying in the hostel there, like it's just the walls close up, and then it's just only people who are staying there that night. So I was reading Dieu sans lettres as the sunset, and then I proposed to my wife later on that night, and so totally forgot about my copy of the book, which got poured on in this giant rainstorm of the night. And so I still have this copy, this like weather damaged copy of God Without Being. That's all wrinkled and it's so material. And I love it because it feels to me kind of like also like a saturated phenomena
Yeah,
in an actual like tangible material sense. So anyway.
I love that story. That's a great story. Um, I want to make sure I have the grammar right around donation, since that
Mhm.
was where we started. And so if I'm understanding you, is it can donation and givenness, are those interchangeable, or is there some grammatical difference that's happening there? I'm hearing you say that I'm not fluent in the language of
Yeah,
phenomenology.
sure.
And so I want to make sure I have this right. I'm starting to envy. I know there's some in our class that took Jack's Intro to Phenomenology class, and there's definitely some when we were discussing the other day inside of our reading group. Some folks have a leg up on this, and that's really great. But I'm hearing that the phenomenological reduction. You bracket your judgments, your assumptions,
Right.
the encounter or interaction with a phenomenon, whether that be an ordinary something or a saturated phenomena. and there's it's the phenomenon offering the donation. That's what's being given. Is this too cartoonish? Do I have that grammar right?
So what's given is given to, as Marion, as Husserl says, what's given is given to the intuition. Um, so yeah, the donation is the way of speaking about the is given, right? It's that event of giving.
Yeah.
The saturated phenomena. One way to dis one way to This is maybe a little too quick, but like the formal distinction that makes a phenomena a saturated phenomena is that in its givenness, it suspends the subject, right? It normally I I as subject am am uh, intuiting the what is given. But in the saturated phenomena, my intuition is, as it were, turned against me, and my subjectivity is now sort of suspended before that. Is um, Marion will use language of like being bedazzled.
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
it's it Yeah, so that I'm its givenness is revealed precisely in the suspension of my subjectivity, right? That's in one sense, like that's how I know there was something there,
yeah.
but I don't know what it was because I don't have the capacity to intend an object as I normally do in cognition, but I know that there was something there because it, you know, unbooted me. I sort of like I went into spinny ball mode, and yeah, this is terrible. I don't like comparing myself to a computer, but whatever.
We'll let
But
it.
like that, that's its givenness. Its
Yeah.
givenness is in that suspension of uh, ordinary subjectivity, and then in the reconstitution of subjectivity that happens, perhaps transformed in its wake.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Now, I if we could leap to Levinas here, and I don't need them to talk to each other. I know
Yeah,
that there's some fault in trying to compare one philosopher's model to another. They don't always translate. But would it be too big a leap to include Levinas's face as a saturated phenomenon? Is that
yeah. Marion does. Marion thinks
yes?
that's the
Oh, okay.
case. Yeah. Um, yeah, Levinas doesn't have the language of saturated phenomena, but he's already gotten this language of reverse intentionality,
Mhm.
and the big difference between Levinas and Marion is for Levinas this is almost entirely one, uh, ethical, and two, for Levinas himself, not necessarily for Levinas's followers, but for Levinas himself, it's really about other human beings. Um, so. And Levinas thinks this ethical responsibility we have in front of the other or before the other is an infinite responsibility. And there's I think there are two really interesting things I want to pull out about what he does with this. One is uh, he retrieves a certain aspect of Descartes' project uh, that is um, that is often overlooked. He says, without wanting to pick up any of Descartes' dualism or anything like that, he says the best thing about what Descartes did is in the third meditation, uh, in the Meditations on First Philosophy, in the third meditation, where Descartes presents his argument for the existence of God. And Descartes argues that there's this idea of the infinite inside of us that, and it's a kind of ontological argument. Descartes says the very existence of that idea in us is proof that God must exist. And Descartes' reason for saying why is because he he argues that uh, our concepts can never be greater than that which gives them. Uh, that that the idea of he's not saying that you can't be mistaken about something being perfect, but that you wouldn't have an idea of infinite perfection. You couldn't have an idea of infinite perfection were there not some kind of infinite perfection. Like
Mm.
that enters into our conceptual horizon. You know, Descartes. Well, Descartes was terrible on animals, so he wouldn't. He's not a great person to think about in relationship to animals. But my dog, who's often up here on the couch with me, Pippin, I'm pretty sure doesn't have an idea of infinite perfection. And we can easily imagine human beings not having that idea. And so Descartes saying, I can't get rid of that thought in me. That's there. I discover it in me. And when I begin to look at that thought, it's so much greater than anything I am. And so Descartes' argument is that that has to have been planted there by God, or that has to exist because God exists, something like that. There's more to it than that, but go read the third meditation. What Levinas does with that is he says what Descartes actually discovering there is the infinite obligation we have in the face of the other. That precedes us in the same way that the infinite idea of God, the idea of an infinite God, precedes the subject in Descartes. And it's only because of that presence in subjectivity, like a kind of strange black hole inside the cogito, uh, because that's there in us, and because that precedes us, that's that's the source of our subjectivity. And Levinas is saying that's actually our infinite responsibility in the face of the other. That my first, before I'm ever a subject capable of intending objects, before I'm ever a person with a name that can enter into the linguistic sphere with other language users, before any of that happens, I have this kind of responsibility. I was intended, and I have an ethical responsibility to the thing that intends me. So Levinas will use all this language, sometimes really violent language. And you have to remember Levinas lived through World War II. His family, he was able to flee the country. His wife and children were only saved because they were hidden uh, by some. I think it was actually by Catholic clergy who hid his wife and children so that they weren't taken to the camps. And Levinas bears this kind of sense of that for the rest of his life. It really characterizes his philosophy, and so he talks about the infinite obligation we have not to kill all the time, and he'll use oftentimes a very extreme language to talk about it. He'll say that like before the face of the other, I'm held hostage, or I'm traumatized, or um, yeah, I'm captured. It's and those that's his sense of what our responsibility is in the face of the other, right? It's not, and it's why is it traumatic? Why does it hold me hostage? Because I'm not in any way equal to it.
Mm.
It's not that in before the other I have a measure of responsibility, and you have a measure of responsibility to me, and we can have like a nice exchange, or we can enter into a social contract not to kill each other for our mutual benefit or whatever. He's saying no, like I just stand before it, and it's all on me.
Mhm.
That before the other, all the responsibility is on me, without my being able to assume anything in exchange. But partially, I think one way to think about it is it's the other for Levinas is always just the other. It's not others, uh, because the other is not duplicable or replaceable in any way. Stalin said the death of whatever 12 men is a tragedy, and what is the quote exactly? It's something like the death of some finite number of people is a tragedy, and the death of millions is a strategy or something like that. Like I'm butchering the quote, but like the point is that by multiplying people, reducing them to sort of its to replaceable widgets,
Yeah.
our all ethical responsibility is removed. And of course, that was like the horrific program of National Socialism, right? You enter into the concentration camps and you have a number tattooed either on your hand or on your arm, you're no longer a name. You've become just a number. You've become replaceable, identical. And Levinas is completely resisting all of that. He's saying, no, the other, as the other appears, always appears just in its sort of wholeness.
Mhm.
It doesn't appear in any, there's no parts to it. There's no assemblage. It's just the presence of another in their wholeness. And so, and so I'm just intended by that. And my first response is that responsibility. And that's what makes me capable of being a subject later. That's what individualizes me and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think for my part, I think there's something really challenging and bracing, like a like a wind from the sea about reading Levinas. It is I find it really important to wrestle with. I also kind of think it's like it's half right, and uh, because for me at least, I think I take so much from this sense of being before being before like sort of the infinite, and especially the other as infinite, and as that being the source of my subjectivity and all that. I think that's exactly right, but
Mhm.
I just don't think the paradigm is my. I don't think the first word for Levinas, the first sort of ethical word is the phrase "Thou shalt not kill." Right? That's the it's that I'm before, but I don't come into the world capable of killing. I only become capable of killing much later. Like I think somehow the infinite, for me at least, the paradigm of that infinite is, uh, I'm we're born into ideally into like families that love us, and so being held by a mother or father, an aunt, an uncle, a sister, whatever, that being held in a in a place of uh, where one is not yet a subject, but is intended still by another. But the intention, what the gaze of let's just take a mother and child. The gaze of a mother and child isn't does it seems to me that that word isn't thou shalt not kill, but it's something about there's something about love in there uh,
Mhm.
that is bringing subjectivity out, and so that's where I think I don't know, at least in my relationship with my children, I didn't feel like they were being traumatized by my looking at them or held hostage. I like to think that it was something else. It's maybe a
Yeah.
little different when they're teenagers, but
Or that the weight as a child upon oneself
yeah,
looking at the face of the mother is that like the depth of my ethical responsibility is mine, and
right,
my weight and mine alone in the face of
right,
my parents. That's one of the thoughts I've been having while reading him. I think I'm like a I'm like a hell yes to the ethics part. And I do understand why he's plucking reciprocity out of the equation in order to avoid hierarchy or one being beholden to another in a way that
hmm
requires contracts. Like he explains that very clearly why it's not reciprocal.
right,
Um, but it seems like a great deal is lost. Like for what's gained by removing that, there's a great deal in reciprocity that's lost. And so
right,
I'm wondering what can be regained in putting reciprocity back in inside of those relationships
yeah,
without falling into the pitfalls that they're valid pitfalls.
right,
Um,
yeah. I think that's exactly right. I mean, there's two ways I would think about that. One, a sort of negative critique in that I think you can argue that the kind of ethical asymmetry that Levinas describes is uh, fundamentally non-relational, uh,
mhm.
and so I think you can run a kind of negative critique that says to be an ethical subject in a one-way relationship of self-sacrifice, where my
Yeah.
duty is essentially to consume myself for your sake. That that actually removes me from the capacity of being in a relationship with you. And that relationship is what is the relationship is the it seems to me to be the ethical desideratum rather than uh, just the responsibility, right? Um, so in a certain sense, like you could see like Levinas is actually producing a new kind of unfortunate dualism where like relationship is it's still not relational, it's still
Yeah,
not possible. So
yeah,
um because if I destroy myself in giving myself, then there's no relation. So
yeah,
um and I think I think maybe the way around it is to think of asymmetry or yeah to think of reciprocity as not necessarily needing to be symmetrical, uh, right? Like there could still be it could still be an asymmetry of the reciprocal relation of a relationship that allows you to have the kind of where I'm still intended without my doing it for the sake of what I get out of it.
yeah,
Uh, but uh, but it's still relational, and especially if what one is aiming at is not if I'm not aiming at say my fulfillment, or to like reduce it to a kind of egoism, and that's exactly what Levinas wants to get away from. Uh, but if what say two friends intend together is the relationship uh, in a kind of gift exchange, we'll see some of this come up again when we read the Pickstock text when she talks about gift
this feels like
exchange.
a foreshadowing of Pickstock
Yeah,
here.
but I think that gift exchange, right? Like in the ideal gift exchange, just as a quick foreshadowing, if you sometimes the holidays roll around and you tell your family exactly what you want and they give you exactly what you want. That's fine. But that's that. But like the ideal gift is a gift that is given uh, that's that is given both as a surprise and Derrida thinks you can't ever attach your name to it, right? Because Derrida's following Levinas. Derrida has an essay called "Can a Gift Be Given?" and he argues that the gift can't ever finally be given because if you attach your name to it, then it's you're giving it for the sake of the recognition. It's not a real gift. It's not an unconditional bestowal or whatever.
No matter what it
Whereas
warrants, thank you.
right, whereas I think what we want to say about the gift is actually no, a gift has to be attached to a
Yeah,
person. You don't want to dissolve yourself. It's like someone just gives me something. That's great. I'm happy that whatever it was that I wanted is there. But what I want is not finally this material good or something like that. That may satisfy a temporary desire, but it's not an infinite good. Whereas a relationship is a kind of infinite good. There's no cap on how good that can be. Just like it doesn't it doesn't diminish over time. It gets richer, and that has to involve that necessarily has to involve my person being given. So a gift that's given to me that surprises me because it knows me and is
yeah,
given from someone I love also invites me to give back to them, but not to give back to them the same thing. If I just gave the same thing back to my wife, like, oh, I really liked it when you gave me this last Christmas. I'm giving it to you now.
yeah.
That wouldn't be the same.
How it works.
It has to be changed.
Yeah,
It's the same thing as given back different, as it were. And because the thing that's really being given is the relationship, not
yeah,
the object that mediates that, right? So I think we could probably begin to make some kind of response to Levinas that way that wouldn't just get trapped in the sense of being held hostage and being traumatized in the face of the other and effacing myself so that I don't enter into that relationship um, once I've sacrificed myself for them. Um, but I'm even hesitant to. I'm a little bit squeamish about how much I already went into that because I really want people to feel the force of
yeah,
Levinas.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, the examples that are very picturesque when we're discussing the those two parallel, the difference between like a family at Christmas and then
sure.
the ethical relationship inside of a Nazi concentration camp. Like those are like
Right.
that those hold different gravity and different weight. Can they is there a language that can translate between um, being bound to the face of the other that also has the gift in reciprocity
Yeah.
without hierarchy or whatever, something in there. I don't,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's rubbing up against the right texture of the thought.
And to draw it back to the question of metaphysics, so Levinas will say that he's doing metaphysics, not ontology,
Mm.
because there's this whole critique of immanence in Levinas. As as a kind of a quick aside, like late 20th century French philosophy basically divides up between people on the side of immanence and people on the side of transcendence. And so you have this sort of like Deleuzians on the side of and Foucault on the side of immanence, and they're all about pure immanence. And then you have the Levinasians and Derrida on the side of transcendence. And what transcendence means for Levinas is this ungraspability of the infinite obligation before the other. And so that's why he calls it metaphysics that he's doing. It's a metaphysics, not an ontology. But metaphysics has become, as he says, ethics. Ethics is first philosophy. So it's not old school metaphysics. Um, but I think we can tie this back, our discussion that we've been having here, back to the larger arc of the course. And we can ask if, in order for there to be reciprocity, in order for there to be relationship, and not just to dissolve in the face of the obligation for the other, doesn't there have to be some kind of possibility of understanding, of knowing the other? And so it's that question of knowledge that is at least related in some of this jargon to metaphysics, right? It all depends on how you cash out metaphysics, but there has to be, it would seem to me that there has to be uh, not just a not just an ethical self emptying before the other and not just an epistemological emptying before the other, but there would have to be some capacity of that reciprocity, both ethically and in terms of knowledge, so that what you are, what I am, is something that can be sustained. That it's not just an event that passes over you, right?
The language I was just trying to search for, it feels like it just kind of would stop if
Right,
it if the asymmetry is that stark, that there's no pathway for communion with anyone, whether it be another being or the divine.
right, right. Yeah, mutuality, relationality. I mean, I think these are the sort of some of the kind of questions that are being the possibility of those, uh, the capacity of us to think those are, are part of what's being raised by these texts,
Mhm.
um, and we'll be and we will be looking at them in more detail in some of the later modules.
Yeah, yeah. This is going to be a hard one to put a bow on top of, so maybe that's a lost cause. But just a final clarifying question here that Levinas is in fact reclaiming the title of metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Marion is not. Am I right? He's saying, yeah, okay, we're doing away with the ontotheological version of metaphysics,
Right,
and now we need
but you'll
to think the underneath of being. Is that?
yeah, but you'll notice that he has Marion has very precisely defined what he thinks counts as metaphysics, which
Yeah,
is the period from Francisco Suarez,
yeah,
who's a kind
right.
of like
Okay.
a sort of like l- late late Thomistic thinker, I believe, from like Francisco Suarez up through Leibniz to Kant.
Yeah,
That's essentially like the period of metaphysics.
yeah.
Um, I think that's a very narrow definition of it. And Marion himself says that but it allows him by talking about that period, which is the effort to capture rationally these these questions of both special and general metaphysics, questions about God, freedom, and immortality, and about the nature of being as being. Uh, but to capture those rationally. And Marion's saying that effort has failed, and so we've come to the end of metaphysics.
Hmm.
But the end of metaphysics is not itself final.
Yeah.
There's the end of
End of
metaphysics,
metaphysics.
uh, and and that's where the kind of questions that were alive during for metaphysics, understood as this historical
Metaphysics.
epoch, they return,
Yeah.
but they return as questions, and we no longer have like the metaphysical way of answering them. So in a certain sense, if your understanding of metaphysics is broader than that constrained time period, as for example mine
I've
is,
turned it up.
then
Siri decided to chime in to our conversation here.
that's really funny. I thought we were like merging with someone else's Zoom or
They're
something.
like, what? No, it's
Um,
go on, Siri.
anyway, if our understanding of metaphysics is not constrained to that period that Marion describes, then we can, I think, imagine a return of metaphysics even in Marion's work itself.
Yeah. He's making a different move, but ultimately that's the yeah, metaphysics still warrants there's still ways to discuss it.
Yeah, exactly. All right.
That feels like a
Well,
good
thanks.
wrap up point. Yeah, thank you. We covered a lot of ground.
We did. That's a lot. All right. See folks in the discussion.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing from everybody else.